Okay, so we're on Derech Hashem, and we're starting chapter 5. We're on section 1, the beginning of chapter 5. And what we discussed until now in Derech Hashem, the past few times at least, was that a person has two aspects. We have a physical aspect and a spiritual aspect. And while the physical aspect yearns for physical things like food, comfort, and physicality, we have a spiritual side, our soul, which yearns to get close to Hashem and do mitzvahs. And we exist, the world that we exist in is predominantly physical, even though we have times with infusions of spirituality, Shabbos, Yontiv. The world in general is a physical world, so it's a constant struggle that a person has to work to enhance his spiritual side of him. And when he enhances the spiritual side, he gets closer to Hashem. And when he gets closer to Hashem, Hashem shines his light upon him. And when Hashem shines his light upon him, he reaches perfection. And that's the goal of humanity, that we should all earn our perfection through our own efforts. And that's basically where we finished off. And because the goal of creation is that we should all reach perfection through our efforts and get close to Hashem. And then we talked about Olam Haba, the next world, Tchias HaMesim, Olam Haza, and things like that. So now that we discussed those general aspects, the Ramchal now is going to get into more particulars and more specific things just about the world in general, the world we exist in. So we entitled this share Body, Soul, Angels, and Demons, and that's exactly what the Ramchal is going to talk about. He's going to explain the world that we live in, and the world that we live in is more than what we just see, right? We see a physical world, we can hear, touch, feel things, but there is a whole universe which exists, which is the spiritual world, and the Ramchal is going to discuss all of that. So let's get started. And again, as always, if you have questions, please stop me. And if you're shy, you can always text it to me in the Zoom chat. Okay. So, Bechalkei Habriya umatzveihem befrat, the different parts of creation and their states. Chalkei klal habriya shnayim, there are two general parts of creation. Gashmiyim v'ruchanim, physical and spiritual. Hagashmiyim heim hamorgashim mechushenu, the physical world, that is anything that we can perceive with our senses, right? You can see it, smell it, hear it, taste it, touch it. Umischalkim le'elyonim v'tachtainim. And the physical world is divided into two sections, the upper physical world and the lower physical world. So, ha'elyonim hem klal hagramim hashememim. The upper physical world, that is the causative aspect in the heavens. Dahainu hagalgalim, the spheres, v'kochveim, and the stars. Hatachtonim. Okay, so there are two parts of the physical world, and he starts by describing the upper part of the physical world. The upper part of the physical world is what we would call the stars and the constellations. So even though seemingly the stars and everything in space, which I can see from my window, is physical, there is an added element to it, an added dimension to it, that the Ramchal is going to discuss later on in section 2, chapter 7, where he says that the constellations, right, there's something called astrology, there's something called mazel, that the stars do have an impact on our world. Now, the Ramchal is going to describe later in section 2, chapter 7, that the impact of the stars, it serves as like a vehicle to connect the spiritual and physical world, and he's going to talk more about that, how the stars work and the different signs and the different mazel. But in general, there is something called mazel, that certain people or nations are born under certain signs, and those signs can impact their personalities and different things about them. But even though that's the case, we say Ein Mazel Yisrael. There is no mazel for the Jewish people, meaning that even though if a person is born under a certain sign and has certain attributes or certain things that are decreed on him, nevertheless he can change that through prayer and good deeds and things like that. We are not limited to what we were born under. For example, Avram Avinu was born under a sign that he shouldn't have any children, but through davening and through his schusim, through his merits, he merited obviously to have children, as we know. So that's the upper part of the physical world. The upper part of the physical world is the stars and the constellations, the upper spheres. Hatachtonim, the lower part of the physical world, Hem Kla Ma Shebechol HaGalgal HaTachton. That's what's inside the lower spheres, the Hainu Haaretz, the land, Hamayim, water, Ha'avir, the air, V'chol Ma Shebehem Min HaGufim HaMurgashim, and any physical things that are in the world. So where we are, right, that's the lower aspect of the physical world. So we have these two aspects of the physical world. The higher level is the constellations, and the lower level is the physical world we are in now. So that's the physical world. Now let's talk about the spiritual world. What is the spiritual world? Now, just before we start that, Rabbi Naaman makes the point that Hashem is neither physical or spiritual. He's above all of this. We're talking about creations, things that God created. We're not talking about God himself. God created physical things and he created spiritual things. So we just explained the physical things God created, and now we're going to explain the spiritual things that God created. So he says that spiritual creations are anything that don't have any physicality. They cannot be perceived with our senses. You can't see something spiritual, you can't smell something spiritual. There is no way for us to physically be in contact with them. There are two types of spiritual creations. One is souls, a soul. He's going to explain what it is exactly. And the second is transcendent beings. Now, he's going to explain what that is also. He's gonna say that one of the spiritual creations is angels. So I just thought it was interesting here. He says that the spiritual, anything that was created in the spiritual world, our senses can't perceive it at all. Which is, I think, sounds like the Rambam. There's a famous debate between the Rambam and the Ramban when the three angels went to visit Avram Avinu. The Rambam says that the conversation, the interaction that Avraham Avinu had with the angels wasn't like we're speaking now, but rather it was through a prophetic dream, right? And the Ramban says no. It says that they were there. He gave them food? There was a whole story. It couldn't be through a prophetic dream. Like how could that be the scenario? So then the Rambam says the reason that he had to say it was through a prophetic dream is because a human being who is all physical can't perceive an angel, which is on a spiritual plane. There's like no way to sense it, so it had to be the whole thing was a prophecy. So I just think the Ramchal sounds a little bit like the Rambam here, that the anything spiritual, which is going to include angels, is something that we can't perceive at all through our physical senses. But now he's going to explain all these things. So he said there's two aspects of the spiritual world. One part is souls, and the second part are transcendent beings, nivdalim. Hanashamas hemin nivraim ruchanim. What are souls? What's a soul? A soul is a spiritual creation. His addu lavo b'toch haguf, that is destined to go into a body. Legavel b'socho, to be bound in a body. Ulekasher bo b'kesher amitz, and to have a very strong connection. V'lipo bo pa'ulo shonas, and to do various things. Bizmanim shonim, at different times. So this is consistent with what the Ramchal said earlier. He said that a person's body and soul is always connected, that after a person dies, it's going to be separated for a little bit, right? And when a person dies, his body goes in the ground and his soul goes into Gan Eden. But after Tchias HaMesim, the soul will return to the body, and the body and soul together will get reward together until the body transforms into a more spiritual state. But the way the Ramchal is describing a soul now, a body and soul, is that they will always be together. Now, Rabbi Naaman points out on the bottom. This is a common. He doesn't say this is a common mistake, but there's a phrase that a soul is a chelok elokam imal, which literally translates he translates it as a godly portion from above. So some people make the mistake that a soul is like part of Hashem. But chas v'shalom, that's not what a soul is, because you see the Ramchal is very clear here that a soul is a creation. A soul is something which God created. It's something very, very holy, but chas v'shalom, it's not, a person's soul is not part of God. That is not how it is. It's a separate creation. And he says, if you want to look more into what that phrase means, to look in Adi B'Marom, page 262, or the klach in Siman 29. Also, I think he uses the phrase in Das Tvunos. But a soul is a creation. That's clear from what he says here. So that's one aspect of the spiritual world. Hanivdalim, the transcendent beings. Hey min nivraim ruchanim, they are a spiritual creation. Bilti me'utadim legufos, they have no connection. They're not destined to be in a body klal at all. So while a soul is a spiritual being which is destined to be in a body, a transcendent being is a spiritual being which has no connection to a body. And there are two types of these transcendent beings. Ha'echa nikra kochos. One is called kochos, forces. V'hasheni malachim. And the second are angels. V'gam he mimalos ramas v'shonos. And even the angels have many different types and different types of angels. V'lahem chukim tivim b'mitziusam. They have different aspects, different natures to them, different types of angels. According to their different levels, there are different levels of angels. There are so many different types of angels with different levels and different purposes that he says one could already say that there are many, many categories of angels. So these kochos, which he described, I don't think he's not going to get into it right now, but here he says that kochos are a creation, but in other places the Ramchal says that kochos are not a creation, but they're really emanations from Hashem. So if you're interested in that topic, Rabbi Neiman goes through it at the back, and it's in Hebrew at the end of this Derech Hashem. So if that topic interests you, if you want to find out more about that, you can look there. But there is something called angels, which are these spiritual beings. And angels, what they do is they carry out Hashem's mission in the world, and he sends them to do various tasks, and there's different types of angels to do different things. And if you are interested, it's a question now we could always ask for anything we're learning here in the Ramchal. We're learning about how God created the world, right? But we're not learning why did he create it like this, why did he not create it like this. So, for example, did Hashem need to create angels that would fulfill his will in the world? He could have done it directly. But we're not discussing, the Ramchal is not discussing that here, but if you want, he does discuss that in, I think it was in that previous thing, in Adir B'Maram, he talks about why Hashem created the world with angels carrying out the various missions, but that's not going to be discussed right here. So I think it was on page 262, where he discusses that topic. Okay, let's go on. V'ulam, any questions? Any questions or comments to this up to this point? Okay. V'ulam nimtza min echad shel nivraim shehu kimo emsai ben ruchanim v'gashmi. And there's another type of creation which is like in the middle between the spiritual and the physical. V'hainu shebe'emes enu morgash mechushenu. Now, really, in the sense that it's spiritual because we can't perceive it with our senses, this type of being. V'gam enu nigbal. And they're also not bound by physicality, and they don't have physical rules that apply to them. So really, this type of creation which he's about to discuss, it's something which we can't see, we can't sense with our physical senses, and it's not bound by physical laws. So we call it spiritual, even though it's not really technically spiritual. But it's different than angels, right? Anyone guess what this is going to be? So we're talking about a type of creation which is not bound by physical laws, and it's not totally spiritual, and they're not angels. What are they? Even though they have certain similarities to angels, and they have certain rules that apply to them, according to their true reality. These are called shadim, demons, right? There is such a thing as demons. They are let's finish the paragraph first. Shuhu min hashadim. V'ulam gam hu yischalek lepratim achadim. There are different types of shadim, different types of demons. Sheyashuv hamin haklali sug legabeim v'hem minim alav. And that they could have. There are various different species of these demons that do different things. So there is something in creation which the Ramchal says is not exactly physical, it's not exactly spiritual, it's not physical in the sense that we can't perceive it with our senses, and it doesn't have physical rules that apply to it, and these are called demons. The Ramchal is going to discuss later what purpose demons serve and what do they do. They're not good. They are a negative spiritual force that people can manipulate to their will. That's one of the things people would do with them, like the sorcerers in Mitzrayim, right? They were able to mimic certain miracles that Moshe Rabbeinu performed. And the way they were doing that was by controlling and tapping into these impure forces and these demons that they could manipulate the physical world according to their will. And that's why we have there's a prohibition in the Torah against kishuv, against witchcraft, right? It doesn't mean, taking like a cauldron and, stirring a pot and like putting frogs' legs in there and like looking for little children or something in the forest. That's not what it means, but witchcraft was a real thing where a person would manipulate these evil forces, these demons, to control the physical world and do it to their will. So Hashem tells us not to get involved with any of that. These are evil spiritual forces that we're not supposed to have anything to do with. Okay, so that's that. V'hine, nivchan v'nivdal min ha'adam levado. And then there's man. A human being is a separate category all to himself. Leos morkov mishnei mine bria nivdalim lagamre. Man is a combination of two opposite parts of creation, total opposites. The hainu hanashama helyena v'haguf hashafal. Man has two components to him: a very lofty soul and a lowly body. Mashalo nimsa b'shum nivra acher. That is not found in any other creation. So the Ramchal just described certain things in creation are totally physical, certain things are totally spiritual, like angels, and then we have one being in all of creation that is a combination of both, and that's a human being, right? As the Ramah, I think I mentioned this before, the Ramah says, and the Asher Yatzar, the blessing that we make every time we go to the bathroom to thank Hashem that everything came out well, that we say, Umafli Lasos, that man is a Pella, he's a wonderment. And the reason that man is a wonderment is because he is the only creation that has two opposites that cleave together. He has the body and the soul. And through the soul, through doing physical things, we sanctify the physical world, and through that become closer to Hashem. That the Ramchal mentioned that earlier, that when we do mitzvahs, what we're doing is we're taking the physical world, this lowly physical thing, and we sanctify it and make it more spiritual, to connect to Hashem. We use the very physical thing which God created, that thing which we would think is totally on a lowly level, and we raise it up, right? We don't believe that we don't believe that everything in the physical world is bad. We believe that it has to be used for spirituality. Okay, let's we have one more paragraph. We'll finish with that. He says you shouldn't make a mistake to think that other animals are like humans. The soul of an animal is a physical thing. It's a very fine, refined type of physicality. And man has that aspect, the fact that he's an animal. So he says that animals do have a soul. However, the soul of an animal is qualitatively different from the soul of a human being. The soul of an animal is actually what he calls physical. It's a physical thing. It's just a very refined physical thing. And he says that even though human beings have that, he's going to talk about the different parts of the soul. There's nefesh, ruach, neshama, whatever it is. So even though that a human being has this animalistic soul, we also have a neshama, which is a very lofty soul which yearns to connect to Hashem. Animals don't have a neshama. Animals have this level of the nefesh, which is just the life force. So while human beings also have that life force, we have a neshama, which is something which wants to cleave to Hashem. Right? You have people nowadays that they don't realize that there's a difference between human beings and animals. Right? It's very important to treat animals properly and to not abuse them, God forbid, and to do whatever. But when it comes to the point where people treat animals like the same level as a human being, that is a big mistake, as we can see right here from the Ramchal, because a human being has a holy soul which was created by God to cleave to Him, which animals do not have. Amnam zulas kol zeh yesh ba'adam neshama al yayna, like we said, that a human being has this lofty soul. Shehi min bria b'fnei atzmo. It's a separate creation. Nivdol min haguf legamrei, totally separate from a body. V'rachu mimenu admon, and very, very distant from it. Sheba v'niksheres bo b'gzeirasa yisbarach shemo ala kavana shezacharnu b'prokim shekadamnu. So he says that a human being is physical, a combination of this physical being and this totally spiritual, lofty soul, and the only reason they're two opposites, how do they cleave together, right? How do we have a body and soul? Is because Hashem said the body and soul have to be together. That's the only reason. An animal just has this physical life force of a soul, which is not a separate, lofty soul, which yearns to connect to Hashem. And with that, we finish the first section of chapter 5, and he's going to now go into it and talk more in detail. Hopefully next week we'll get to that. Any questions or comments, complaints, advice? Okay. Thanks for coming. Hope everyone has a nice evening.